York case. This is Little Rock member. Thank you very much, Little Rock. And sorry I missed it. Let's go to. We'll go to Oklahoma now. That's perfect segue.
What's fascinating is before I even realized that case was before the Supreme Court docket, I was trying to explain to somebody a couple of months ago that an old buddy of mine is from Oklahoma. He's one of the top Native American lawyers in the country. And he told me, he says, Bob, really, Eastern Oklahoma is Indian country. He said, if you really studied the treaties. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. And I remember looking at it many, many years ago and agreeing with him. And my great professor at University of Wisconsin Law School, totally opposite politics of mine, has been very generous in writing extraordinary recommendations for me to judges and courts and other people. Richard Monette, a great Native American tribal lawyer. Indian law is what it's called within the American legal jurisprudence. That's why I use that phrase. And he was chief of his tribe for a period of time until the government didn't like him being chief of his tribe, so they came after him for a little while. He taught me a lot about the politics of law. He was my small section professor. What is in Wisconsin? When you go in, you are mostly in classrooms of 200 people or so. But you share all of your classes with a group of 20 who share one class. That's what's called the small section class, which is just the 20 of you. And he taught torts when we had great fun. I remember he gave a description once, and it was about a Native American guy comes up to somebody, asks to dance with his girlfriend. The guy says no, and they end up with a bar fight. And he says, and it was technically you were learning the tort of battery. But as we were going through, he goes, what's the lesson? What's the lesson? And came to me, and I was like, I know I'm missing what the lesson is. I somewhere here. He goes, he thought I would guess it. He goes, Barnes, it's simple. If an Indian comes up and asks to dance with your wife, you say yes. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So that's the kind of personality he was and is. I used to call it the railroad rule in torts, because if you study the history of torts in America, you study that all of a sudden it magically changed to favor railroads for about 50 years. So I used to say the railroad rule, which is that the railroad wins. I don't know if you guys did IRAC in law school. So issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. That's how we were taught first year, right? So you had to identify the issue, what's the rule, what's the analysis to the facts, what's the conclusion, the holding. IRAC is the whole thing. So he would always be asking, what's the IRAC for different cases? And he always had a unique political take on it that I often shared. But he wrote a great article called Treaty Federalism. And his point is that Native American treaties should be treated the same way that the compact between the states is treated in the federal government. And we should have a form of treaty federalism and respect the overlapping sovereignties between the two. So the Supreme Court's decision, people are thinking that it means that if you're in Eastern Oklahoma, your land is now owned by a tribe. That's not the case. This only under Congress's law, the federal courts govern any dispute involving a tribe member of certain kind, civilly or criminally, such that it can only go to either the tribal court system or to the federal court system. The local state government has no power or authority. The reality is the law, if you read it, was clear that Eastern Oklahoma was all tribal land, such that the state of Oklahoma did not have criminal or civil jurisdiction over most tribal members, and it only applies to tribal members. If you're not an Indian tribal member, this case has no impact on you whatsoever.
And so let me stop you there just to clarify one point. It was all tribal land based on treaties between U.S. government, federal government, and natives.
Exactly. The reality is we have not honored. I think the best argument for reparations in America is that the United States government, as a federal government, and a lot of states governments that have piggybacked off of it, have not honored our treaty requirements with tribes. So we made a promise, we made an agreement, we put it in writing, we should abide by it. And we have not abided by it, and with a lot of tribes over a large area of land, over a large area of time. And we violated those tribes' treaties repeatedly and routinely. Now, a lot of the genocide stuff is false. That was mostly a result of disease, not a result of deliberate intentional death. So I don't agree with the left on that side of the aisle. But we do have treaties. We've often not applied those treaties. We've often not enforced those treaties. We've often stolen property and mineral rights related to those treaties and not properly remunerated the tribe. And we often do not respect tribal sovereignty the way we should. There's a great show called Longmire that's on Netflix. In another life, I want to be the sheriff. That's the character Longmire. But they deal a lot with the tribal court overlapping issues and tribal sovereignty, which is very fascinating. Not always from a tribal sympathetic perspective, but does it better than most shows. And so, yeah, so I mean, technically, Justice Gorsuch's decision was, in my view, the legally correct decision. Congress can remedy it. Congress is likely to remedy it. They're already negotiating with the tribe to create a manageable system. Mostly, this is not about the Fed. Now, the particular case is horrible.
Yeah,
The
actually,
guy committed a horrendous crime.
If everybody doesn't know, the individual who brought the suit was convicted of sexually abusing a 4-year-old.
Yes.
And the defense was that the state had no jurisdiction because he's a native, it's native land, and therefore only the feds could prosecute the crime. That's the obvious question. Why didn't the feds prosecute the crime?
Exactly. I think there's some backstory we don't know, because to me, they probably chose that case because they figured the state of Oklahoma probably did, because they wanted the power to regulate Native Americans and the tribes and more broadly. Because most of these disputes end up being about taxes. 9 times out of 10, it's the state government wants to tax tobacco, wants to tax something else that's on tribal land. They want control over the tribal members. So they may have chosen the worst possible case, got the feds to say, let us, the state, prosecute it, because this will be a tough case for the courts to say, we're going to let them walk. But I don't blame the courts for simply applying the law. I blame the state of Oklahoma for not making sure that individual was properly prosecuted by tribal and federal authorities, who I guarantee you would have been happy to do so. Those kind of charges they don't flinch from. I think it was the state using a sensational case that they thought would allow them to have a massive power grab, and they almost got away with it. They got 4 justices to go their way.
Okay, I mean, so it makes a little more sense getting past the initial unlikability, to say the least, of the plaintiff and the underlying issue. Basically,
and the shock of discovering half of Oklahoma is actually Indian country.
So half of Oklahoma is native land based on treaties that the government has signed that had hitherto not respected. This correct. Decision, 5-4, basically says if you are native and you live on this territory, you are subject to the laws regarding the natives as far as income tax goes, as far as native status goes, and as far as application of state law, or I don't know if it's called immunity, but non-applicability of state law to federal law, and it only applies to natives.
Exactly. It's sovereignty that arises both from citizenship and geography. So it's territorial and citizenship driven. And it's if you are an Indian tribal member within the geography of eastern Oklahoma, then only the federal government or the tribe can criminally prosecute you for a wide range of criminal behaviors. The state doesn't have jurisdiction over you because that's not their land as it applies to you as a citizen, because you're not a citizen of the state, you're a citizen of the tribe in reality.
And now, speaking of the tribe, actually, I saw the super chat and it was a relevant question. Mark Watson says, why is it all tribes and not just the Muskogee? Are many Indian treaties similar? So I have no idea.
Oklahoma is very unique. I mean, Oklahoma was all designated as Indian country originally, so it's very unique history, the state of Oklahoma. So it would be analogous for specific treaties for specific tribes in other parts of the country, but Oklahoma is very unique. Oklahoma was originally promised, my recollection was when I researched this 20 years ago, as all tribal land, but it was clear that eastern Oklahoma definitely was. And we forcibly remove people. My hometown in Chattanooga, you go across the border to Rossville. It's named Rossville after John Ross, the great Cherokee tribal chief. There's still a home dedicated to him. Are you still there? I'm live, but I do not see Viva. I'll ask the people that are commenting whether they see me.
Dream. Okay.
There you go. You disappeared momentarily. I didn't know whether I was just me, just you, or what.
No, you insulted me on that last thing you said.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. The John Ross, the great Cherokee tribe.
I'm just glad I got back in before I actually started sweating as it is, but I'm glad I got back in. Okay, sorry about that.
No problemo. So yeah, that's the long and short history of it. So it depends on each individual tribe's history. Oklahoma is unique in the scale of the number of tribes it applies to and the legacy of the land.
And now, Robert, so a question I'm having based on my limited knowledge of Canadian Aboriginal law is recognizing half of Oklahoma going to have any impediments, or is it going to have any impact on non-natives' right to own land and develop land? Because that's
nope. So we'll have no impact there.
It doesn't turn it into a native reserve.
No, it's interconnected. So it's citizenship and territory combined. And so it's not separate.
Okay, and I know I lost a couple of the super chats that were pending, but Joshua Kitchen says this discussion has changed my mind on the event. So it is not, because I guess some people were under the impression it turns half of Oklahoma into a native reserve.
Because the gaslighting sensational headline was half of Oklahoma, now Indian country. And so I have a client that owns a lot of land in eastern Oklahoma. And so they're like, hold on a second. I was like, no, that's not what it means. It's a sovereignty of a government can arise either through the citizenship of the person, personal in personam jurisdiction, or through the land. In this case, it arises only in the context of both. Those people on that land equal only tribal or federal jurisdiction for certain purposes, because that too can be changed by Congress as how they pass the law.
What is the population of Native Americans in Oklahoma? It's
not very big, very small.
Okay, so hypothetically, like the fringe benefit of what might have just happened is that all Native Americans living on the territory, all of a sudden, I don't know if they pay taxes in the states. I suspect they don't pay federal taxes.
They would pay federal taxes. The state taxes would depend on the circumstance of the situation. I think the biggest impact is mostly they can't be harassed by the local county government. Okay. And there is an unfortunate history in a lot of local governments. I clerked for a tribe in Wisconsin, and the local governments have an ugly history of how they've interacted with tribes over the past 50, 60, past 100 years.
Okay, amazing. Now, Roy Welsh says, would this mean that a tribal member is immune to a prohibition under state law if federal law doesn't prohibit? I.e., if it was in California and involved guns that were illegal in the state, but not by feds?
It can be. It gets really tricky. So, like, technically all tribal casinos are on tribal land, but sometimes they purchase land for that purposes that wasn't originally designated reservation land. And then they usually do a compact with the state to resolve issues in advance. It can get tricky with tobacco. It can get tricky with guns. It can get tricky with a wide range of areas. There was a question about whether, in my view, I agree with Richard Monette. I believe they should have the same sovereignty as the state. So, and that the treaty should govern it just like the compact between the states and the feds govern it. So there should be a form of treaty federalism in which they can do whatever they want unless prohibited by federal law from doing so.
All right, that's amazing. And Courtney Grace says, Viva, I have to say this has put a dent in wanting to find out if I'm part Kickapoo or Cherokee. It's amazing. People were. I didn't watch Matt Christensen's video on the subject, but did half of Oklahoma just get taken away? And is this how you start a civil war? I mean, I saw people on Twitter. I'm glad. I thought I understood it based on the articles. This definitely has clarified my understanding, and I suspect, based on the comments, a lot of people are more enlightened now as to what this decision actually means. Yeah. And my understanding is nothing for non-natives, and it might be confusing now for the natives in that a lot of them who have been convicted of state crimes might now get to go back and have new trials.
That's the biggest impact. Biggest impact is that their trials can get thrown out, at least in the near short term. And I have no doubts that there's a lot of those cases that were problematic cases. I mean, I dealt with a lot of undue hostility towards tribal members when representing and working with tribes in my legal career. So that was very ill-deserved and undeserved attacks. And it's long overdue that we recognize our explicit and express promises to them and at least abide by some of them, given we haven't abided by a lot of them.
All right. And actually, there was another interesting question right here. Can a sex offender be retried in federal, or does double jeopardy prevent that? I would imagine anyone who was acquitted of a crime cannot be retried.
Well, no double jeopardy applies, period, generally speaking, because a tribe is considered a separate sovereign. So just like you can prosecute someone in state court for, so that's how, like Rodney King riot, they got acquitted in state court, then they got convicted in federal court. The theory is that it's not double jeopardy because it's not the same sovereign. It's a different sovereign. And the tribal governments are also seen as a separate sovereign. So you can get prosecuted in tribal court even when you've been acquitted in state or federal court, and vice versa.
All right. And on civil law says, yeah, Brian, he can be retried in federal court, no double jeopardy problem.
Right.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't think there's any more.
I think Uncivil did a good discussion of the case.
Yes, the only problem, I couldn't watch an hour 43 minutes. I was watching through it at 2 speed, but even still, I'm on my phone data by and large right here.
Yeah, which is out in the Canadian boonies. Though I I think we're barred from going to Canada. So I saw a friend of mine's a professor in Canada. She's more to the left, and I think she was celebrating that the Canadians are blocking the Americans from coming for at least a period of time.
Right. The border is still not open to non-essential.
That's insane.
It's. I remember when they shut the border. That's when I really started having apocalyptic thoughts in my head. Like,
could you sneak across the border, like pretend you're fishing on one of the lakes and come across?
I could literally swim into the U.S. from here, but I suspect they have something on the border that protects from boats drifting into the American side. Actually, before we get into the next subject, there was one super chat that I missed.